Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Goldberg. I'm a Director of Product Marketing at Snowflake, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. Welcome to the Snowflake Office Hours with QuoteWizard, which helps consumers navigate the insurance landscape, compare quotes and companies, and find the perfect policy at the best price. So over the next 30 minutes, we're going to spend time talking with David Garrison, Senior Data Engineer at QuoteWizard. David is a member of QuoteWizard's BI team. He's a data junkie, and over the past decade has worked on data pipelines in industries, including international trade regulations, Bible software, mobile gaming, and insurance leads. David enjoys supporting data analysts and data scientists in making intelligent, data-driven decisions. He'll be talking about his journey and success today using Snowflake. So for those of you on the line, you probably know that Snowflake, we're a cloud data platform that supports many workloads, with the main ones being data warehousing and data lakes. On this call, David's going to talk mostly about our data lake workload, but also talking about how they plan to move quickly into the data warehousing workload as well. And as this event proceeds, please type all questions you have into the Q&A panel on the On24 dashboard, because most of the content here is going to be David answering your questions. And then at the end of the event, we're going to leave time for me to verbally ask your questions to David. So please ask any and all questions in that Q&A panel, as no question is off limits. So without further ado, David, off to you.
Hello. As he said, I'm David Garrison. Kind of went through all my intro stuff, but I'm the subject matter expert for Snowflake at my company, which is why I'm here. So I'll go into a little bit more detail about the company. QuoteWizard is a website where you can go if you're looking for insurance. And once you go there, you put in some basic information, you'll pretty quickly get multiple quotes to compare different options. And that's all free because we make our money by improving lead quality for insurance agents. And a bit more than a year and a half ago, we were purchased by LendingTree, which does mostly the same thing, but for loans. So we've had a lot of growth as of late. And one of the things that we're investing in is our Snowflake Data Lake. All right. That's enough of our business model. We're here to talk about Snowflake. So a year ago, we started talking about the need for a data lake. We have a few data sources that don't always agree, and we needed a place to bring that all together and build out a source of truth. Our data scientists were behind Snowflake because it means one place for all the data that they need, and they can scale up their processing separate from the storage and separate from other teams, so they can do all their heavy workloads and analysis. Our DBAs were behind it because we have a lot of data that's just taking up space in our other systems that needs to be archived. And Snowflake, again, their separation of storage means that we can effectively infinitely scale out on data volume and save a lot of money compared to our previous archive solution. Some other pain points that we were trying to address, that our SOX and HIPAA compliance folks were behind Snowflake because security and roles and permissions and time travel, all the things that let you audit effectively and control who has access to PII, for example. Our devs were behind Snowflake because of the zero-copy cloning that allows us to improve our dev test stage production environment process, our SDLC. Our marketing analysts were kind of okay with Snowflake because they didn't have to learn a new language. It was still a bit of a hard sell to have them switch their tools around, but they've gotten on board, so that's been good. And I was interested in it because it's a new shiny toy. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the path that we've taken to get where we are. So this first line here has been my main undertaking for a while now, with significant contributions from the rest of my team, of course. I say that because I know some of them are listening. I could probably talk for about 45 minutes on just this one bullet point, which is good because just this week I actually was selected to give a talk on this at the Snowflake Summit conference this summer. So if you want to hear more. In short, though, we use Azure Data Factory and Azure Storage Accounts, those little icons there, to orchestrate pulling incremental changes from our production transactional SQL Server into Snowflake. So it doesn't ever have to process the same records twice, but it's easy to manually do that if we need to. It uses Snowflake's semi-structured data handling to automatically pick up schema changes. It converts hard deletes from our source system into soft deletes in Snowflake. It runs every 10 minutes to incrementally pick up those changes. And I'd love to dive into this further, but I only have so much time. So I'll move on to this next point. We're using Event Hub to stream a few different data sources into Snowflake using Snowpipes. And that's been going really smoothly. Again, using semi-structured data, we can handle a lot of different schema changes and semi-structured data. And we want to be this to be our new standard for bringing data into Snowflake eventually in general. We also recently, this isn't exactly streaming, but we recently spun up a Databricks project to pull data in from Google Analytics directly into Snowflake. So that's been a cool integration that we built recently. And the rest of these things I've kind of mentioned from the pain points, but it's been working great for data archival. Snowflake has very fine-grained control of role permission stuff, so our DBAs have been great for figuring out how to manage our compliance and PII access. And the development process in Snowflake has been great with zero copy cloning and time travel. So that's been a big improvement for keeping our test and production environments in sync, for example. So that's kind of the highlights of our integrations and pipes currently. But we will soon be working on building out a data warehouse on top of this data lake. And we'll be building all of this out further. And so for the value that we're getting out of Snowflake, I'll read this quote from one of our data scientists. He said, "Snowflake has opened up the door for us to quickly run and analyze large-scale experiments that were previously impossible for us to conduct." I think that mostly speaks for itself. Having all of their required data in one place has made life better for them. And the rest of these I've, again, kind of mentioned, SDLC, single source of truth, semi-structured data handling. And I do want to call out that we've had some excellent support from Snowflake. They've helped with troubleshooting, bug reports, hosting events like this. So it's been a good experience so far. And with that, not quite 10 minutes, but I'm happy to hand it back to Joe to moderate some Q&A.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, David. So we do have some questions that came in via the On24 Q&A box. And also a reminder to everyone on the call to please submit any questions you have via David or myself via the Q&A box, because the remainder of this office hours is really going to be us answering the questions that you have. So one question came in here, and it's asking about, it just says, can you talk more about the Google Analytics data integration project? Can we talk a bit more about that?
Sure, I'll touch on that a little bit. So we built a Databricks pipeline, or whatever they're called, a Databricks notebook that connects to the Google Analytics API, structures the request to build out the JSON and fiddle with that JSON into the structure that we want it. That all happens in Python. And then it outputs a file, which gets dumped into, so at that point, it creates a file, it dumps that into a storage account on Azure. And at that point, it kicks it back to the Azure Data Factory pipeline that calls that notebook. And that just triggers a copy into statement on Snowflake. So, and that pulls it right into Snowflake. It triggers a stored procedure to do a little bit of post-processing on the Snowflake side. So in short, the Databricks side does most of the work of creating the file, pulling data down, and then it's just a pretty simple copy into Snowflake using the orchestration.
Excellent. Another question came in here. They're talking about data lake and data archive. So the question is really just in Snowflake, do you do the data archiving? So you can talk to that a bit.
So yeah, I kind of mentioned that there's really two main use cases of our data lake. It's both a place to bring all of our data into one place, but also in our production server, we get, I don't know, millions of people visiting our site per day. And that all creates logs that are only useful for a week at most, usually an hour. And so all that stuff we want to hold on to for auditing and all of that. And so that we wanted a new solution for that. So we are currently in our production database, we can't have that all built up in one table because that table just gets too big, unwielded join to, our stuff slows down, and that costs money. In Snowflake, however, the way its indexing works, the way its compute and storage works, that hasn't been an issue. So we, in Snowflake, we're constantly funneling this data into Snowflake through this pipeline that I mentioned. And in production, we clear out that data, but in Snowflake, we just keep it. So the Snowflake table has just been getting bigger and bigger, has been acting as an archive. We don't have to do any other things to process or manage it. It's just now holding onto all the data, and it hasn't been a performance issue for us so far. Gotcha. That's one of the main use cases of our archive. There's a couple other things that we're just kind of throwing in there using storage accounts, but that's the most interesting one.
Okay. Another question came in is, did you migrate directly from SQL Server to Snowflake, or did you look at other tools first?
We looked at a couple of tools. Most of them were kind of just wrappers around what we're doing now that manage the creating of files in a storage account and copying them into Snowflake. And we had some special needs with dealing with temporal tables and setting up these. We wanted to keep all the temporal table information in Snowflake as well, which added an extra degree of complication. We wanted it to be incremental. So we built our own, basically, is the short answer. We did consider other tools, though. I'm not an expert on what other tools might be good, depending on your use case, though.
Gotcha. Okay. And this one's a good question. It's basically asking, what's your distinction? It says you say you're using Snowflake as a lake versus a warehouse. What's the distinction in your mind between the two?
Sure. Data warehouse, I typically, it's kind of just a jargon term. I typically think of as a place for like a Snowflake schema, not to be confused with a Snowflake system, where you'll have facts and dimensions, denormalized data, whereas the data lake is a place where we have the data in it exactly as it looked like from the source. We keep the naming conventions as close as we can. We keep all the columns the same. We don't process much of the data. So we just dump it in there, and it's a big data lake. It's a place where you throw things. And then you do processing to create a warehouse, and that warehouse is more specifically designed to be optimized for certain types of queries, certain types of reports. So once we get into that more, we'll be doing even more reporting than we are now. We've kind of started throwing reports at Snowflake, but the warehouse will really be where we start doing more of that.
Gotcha. Okay. Another question, this can be kind of I think a quick answer, but what's the average file size that you're loading using Snowpipe?
That is a great question. So average is not a good measure here. Some of these tables that we're pulling incrementally, they'll have one record updated every 10 minutes or every day. And so those file sizes are whatever the size of one record is. They're tiny. And those load just about as quickly as a file that has 10,000 records. And then we also, when we're doing our initial loads of these tables, we can have files as big as, I don't know, 10 gigabytes plus. They can be pretty gigantic, and those take a while to load. But so I guess average isn't a good measure here. Some of them are tiny. Yeah. A lot of them are tiny, but then we have done big files without any issues.
Yeah. Great. So one came in, and I'll take a cut at this one. They're just asking, is Snowflake HIPAA certified? And just take a step back, I'll talk about security very quickly. So we have a lot of security measures in place to protect data inside of Snowflake. So we encrypt data in transit, we encrypt it at rest with our keys or your keys. We have IP-based whitelisting, so only certain IPs can access your account. We have very, very granular roles-based access control to limit who can see and do what inside of Snowflake. And then we also offer optional multi-factor authentication, or OAuth or SSO integration. And in terms of certification, so we are certified against SOC 1 Type 2, SOC 2 Type 2, HIPAA, PCI DSS, and you also meet NIST 800-145 requirements. In regards to HIPAA, and this is per regulations, before any PHI data is stored in Snowflake, a signed BAA agreement should be in place between you, the customer, and Snowflake. So another question related comes in saying, how does Snowflake support PII data? And again, from just the pure technology point of view, data is data, right? Our system doesn't know, that's PII data. So again, it's really up to the customer to decide what they put into Snowflake, if it's PII or not. And then also if they're going to go through the BAA agreement as well with Snowflake. So a question then for you, David, is what process I think you touched on this before, but maybe just double click on the process you use to load data in Snowflake, and do you use any ETL tool, or do you script most of that?
Yeah, so this main pipeline that's probably referring to, it uses Azure Data Factory to do most of the orchestration. Basically what it does is it runs a query on our production SQL Server account, or production SQL Server database, and it takes the output of that and dumps it directly into a storage account file. And then that gets copied into Snowflake, and then it triggers some extra processing in Snowflake, kind of as I described for the Google Analytics. It's a similar, theoretically a similar pipeline. So I've kind of lost track of the original question, but we orchestrate it with Azure Data Factory, and then most of the heavy processing, the minimal processing, happens on the Snowflake side using a stored procedure.
Gotcha. Actually, that does tell to another question that came in, which is asking about, did you implement any stored procedures in Snowflake? So you just touched on that, but maybe you can expand on stored procedures.
Yeah, they've been pretty useful for doing our data manipulation. Building out a data lake requires a lot less of that, so it's basically just like do an upsert or clean out this table, or we have some stored procedures for managing permissions, which have been very useful. But one thing I will comment on that I see a lot on like Stack Overflow is people trying to build full ETL solutions in Snowflake using stored procedures. And I would say it's not quite built for that. Having an orchestration tool to manage the timing dependencies is very useful. So the stored procedures for processing is great, but having the Azure Data Factory for managing that has been important.
Great. Let's see here. Another question rolled in. Actually, we got a bunch of questions here. One of them is, you mentioned how Snowflake has helped you reduce costs. Can you add some context to that? How much are you saving relative to your previous solution?
I have permissions to see how many credits we're spending, but I don't know exactly how that translates to dollars. I don't have that report on me. That's not exactly you'd have to talk to our DBAs about that.
Gotcha. Okay.
I think it has saved us some money. It has been we've spent money in places that we didn't quite expect. like our warehouses are costing us more than we thought, but our storage is less or something like that. I don't know. I don't have a great answer.
Gotcha. Yeah. And for those on the line, I mean, and typically a lot of the cost savings, it really depends. If you're moving from on-premise to Snowflake, obviously immediately you're going to see a lot of benefits in terms of moving to the cloud. Just the hardware costs go down substantially, especially because you don't have to buy high-end storage as well. I mean, we're $23 a terabyte after compression a month, which is a pass-through of the underlying cloud provider storage costs. So that's orders of magnitude cheaper than on-premise appliances in terms of storage costs. For the other costs that Snowflake charges, it's compute, and that's basically using EC2 images or Azure VMs under the covers to do load data into Snowflake or to run queries or do DML operations. And we charge you for that only on a per second basis, and so it's relatively cost efficient, the compute as well. So between storage and compute, our costs are substantially lower than running on-prem or even in the cloud and other solutions. And then the other big cost savings typically our customers talk about is just in terms of maintenance, because we're offered as a service on the cloud. So it's just access this via URL, and we do a lot of automation under the covers. We're kind of a DBA under the covers hidden, so you don't have to do things like vacuuming and partitioning and indexing, and of course no physical hardware to deal with. So it's pretty typical for our customers to say they saved 90% plus over their prior solution. But I encourage you guys to look at case studies on our website and hear it from our customers and not a guy in marketing. So, okay, let's see here.
I'll just add quickly that, for us, this data lake is kind of a new thing for us. It's not something that we're replacing something else with. We will soon be replacing our old warehouse with the Snowflake warehouse. So I'll have more to say about that in months down the road, but it isn't quite your typical scenario for that.
Gotcha. Okay. So let's see here. Another one is, did you implement any SPD types or dimension modeling, et cetera, in Snowflake?
Slowly changing dimensions. Because of how we're taking advantage of temporal tables in Snowflake or in SQL Server, and we're keeping all of that information as we bring it into Snowflake, we're maintaining all of the temporal table value, which is basically a complicated, slowly changing dimension. So yes, but we haven't gotten to the point of building out a warehouse with well-curated dimensions and figuring out how we want to manage all those dimensions. So yes.
Gotcha. No, there you go. So let's see here. Are you using any sort of encryption methods to mask the PII data?
We're mostly using, I think we are doing that a little bit somewhere, but mostly we're using role access. Mm-hmm. So if we have a table that has semi-structured data and some of that data has PII, we will have the data hidden from general use, the table hidden from general use, and then we'll have a view on top of that, one which just doesn't have those PII columns in it, and that anyone can have access to, whoever's allowed to be in that database, and then we can set up a separate view which has access to those PII columns. We haven't even really needed to do that, but once an auditor comes around, we probably will. So we'll be able to create a view and give the access to just whoever needs it. And so we can pretty finely control just by having slightly different views or different schemas in managing with role access.
Gotcha. Okay. Someone asked, they said, can you elaborate further on what has happened to the number of use cases since you've started using Snowflake? And it could be either like the growth in terms of number of users or an expansion in the types of workloads.
Yeah, we did a lot of research ahead of time to kind of have a pretty good idea of what our use cases were. So from the beginning, we've been talking to our data scientists. What are you going to need out of this? What data are you going to need to bring in? Talking to our DBAs. What are you going to need to archive? So I wouldn't say our use cases have grown that much, but we do have quite a few different use cases and needs out of Snowflake. And all of those have pretty much progressed well. I can't say we have any use case that has failed miserably. The one main thing that we haven't gotten to yet is really business reporting. And that's going to really need to wait until our warehouse is built out. So we're still in progress on some of these things, but really we've actually followed our roadmap pretty well. Maybe a little slow on the timeline, but that's just development for you.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. So another question came in. Yeah, can you explain on schema changes? Do you dynamically add and drop columns from a table?
Yes. So that is dealt with using semi-structured data. So when we pull from our source system, we take all the columns in the typical relational database table and dump it into a semi-structured JSON file. And then when we pull that into Snowflake, Snowflake kind of automatically handles all that. And so we just treat basically the whole table as if it's one JSON column. And then if a schema changes happens on the source system, that just gets reflected in that JSON file, and it just continues to get loaded as it was before. So the only thing that you need to change is something like a view that is parsing that JSON blob. So if a user adds a column and then a month later comes in and says, hey, where's that column? It's been loaded this whole time. He's just not able to see it yet because we need to add it to our view. And that's a very quick, easy change. And so now we pull it out of JSON, and it's there for, from since he started sending it to us. I think that answers that.
Okay. So another question came in. I'll answer this because you already addressed it. It just says, are you planning to build a warehouse on Snowflake or on SQL Server? And the answer was that there is a plan to use Snowflake as a data warehouse in the near future. So and I'll take another question just came in, which is pretty broad. It just says, what cloud platforms does Snowflake run on? What BI tools will it work with? So in terms of cloud platforms, we run on the big three: Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform as well, in different regions around the world. And we also have pre-built connectors with all the major BI tools like Tableau, Looker, MicroStrategy, Qlik, and so on. And we support, basically anything that'll connect into us via JDBC or ODBC. And we have additional drivers for Python, R, Spark, Go, Node.js, and .NET, so we can integrate with data science tools as well. Okay, so let's see here. Another question came in. And I know you, David, you touched on this on your first slide when you talked about the data lake, but maybe just a quick, 30 seconds. High level, what's the main problem Snowflake is solving for you?
The main problem, I definitely mentioned in the slides is, here, I'll pull up the slide. These were our main pain points. I would say the single source of truth was the biggest issue that we had, different data sources that don't agree with each other. So building out this data lake where we have, this is what is true, and being able to join all these things together has been the biggest value, which is more to say it's the value of the data lake. And Snowflake has been a great platform for that.
Great. So another question's coming in, and I can take credit this. It just says, can we host our BI tools like Power BI or Tableau on Snowflake Cloud? And so just to be clear, we are not a cloud provider like AWS or Azure is. We're just an application offered up as software as a service on the major cloud providers. So we don't actually host BI tools. What you can do is you can integrate your BI tools with Snowflake very easily. And those BI tools can live on-premise, or they can be, you can put them on a private cloud or in one of the public clouds, doesn't matter. You just connect them via their UI up to Snowflake. And again, we'll work with any major BI tool. So for you, David, another question here is, do you have a separate server for prod QA dev or a single server with different databases? How do you handle moving code from dev to QA to production?
That is a great question that is hard to answer very quickly, but we have one Snowflake account server and one big database for our data lake, and most of the divisions in that are managed in schemas. And then when we need, like when I personally need a dev version of that, I can clone the production database into a dev database with my initials and a date on it. And then I have a production-like version of our data and I can point a dev version of our pipeline at that, and basically have an entire dev system set up from scratch in, that looks just like prod in, I don't know, all of 10 minutes. And then we can do similar things for test, except we try to build it out to be a little bit more, it's not just regularly refreshed like that. It's actually kept up to date separately. But we can refresh it quickly. We're still kind of building out all the different ways that we want to do this and all the different test scenarios, because we need to handle streaming data a little differently, because we actually have test sources for those. So it's a little more complicated than that. But yeah, we use one Snowflake server.
Yep. Excellent. And by the way, for those in the line, we've got some good questions still rolling in. We'll probably go about 5 minutes after so we can address these. And then let's hear. Another question is, are you using anything like Terraform, Flyway DB to manage your Snowflake objects?
Not really yet. That's something that we want to, that's like data modeling, right? I'm not super familiar with those tools themselves, but we want to do more of that kind of thing, yeah.
Gotcha. Then here's kind of a high-level one. It's how long did it take for you to implement Snowflake? Did you lift and shift full solution or move incrementally?
It's kind of a new tool for us. The data lake is kind of new for us. So we didn't have to do any lifting and shifting. So it's been an incremental thing, is really the answer to that.
Gotcha. And then going back to
sorry, the beginning of that question was how long did it take? It took us a few months to set up our initial pipeline to get data moving in there from the source data, from the first source database, and then adding on other tables or other sources has been incrementally easier as we've gone. So then getting pipes in only took us a little while, and then getting a new database in was pretty quick. So it took us a few months to get started, and then it's been probably 6-8 months since then.
Awesome.
And we're in a pretty good state of kind of having a full production data lake.
Great.
We're still bringing new stuff into it, though.
Yeah.
Sorry, I keep interrupting you.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's good. It's a ongoing work in progress. And by the way, one thing to elaborate on something you said earlier about the test and dev is, and I'll tell you how a lot of our customers work with Snowflake and test dev environments, is they have one main Snowflake account and they use it for test and dev and production. And what they just do is they use RBAC to control who can access test dev versus production. And Snowflake, we also have the ability to do what we call zero copy cloning, where as it sounds, you can create a clone of any object like a database, a table, a schema, and you can create a copy in seconds. And it's all done at the metadata layer. So it's really, as it sounds, it's a zero copy clone. So if you clone an entire database, you're not copying the data twice. It's done at the metadata layer. And so maybe test and dev can play off of their own separate clone. So if they break it or do anything bad to it, it doesn't affect the production clone. So there's a lot of interesting things you can do with Snowflake and zero copy cloning to give people different objects in a risk-free manner. So that's another sort of nice aspect of Snowflake. Okay, so another question came in around, what does your data team organization look like? What's the number of resources required to support Snowflake, and with what skills?
Sure. So my team has 5 or so engineers. We've got 3 or so DBAs, 3 data scientists, a few data analysts, a data architect, and then a few other teams that are mostly interested in sending data to Snowflake. So we're working with them as well. I don't know how to more answer that question in much more detail. We've definitely had to dedicate a couple of people to it. Myself and one of our DBAs in particular are kind of mostly focused on Snowflake these days, at least getting this stuff all set up initially. But it's been enough to get a pretty big, well-scaling solution up. So I don't know if that gives you an idea.
Yeah, excellent. And what we'll do is we're kind of out of time here. I'll answer one more question that came in, or actually 2 quickly, and then we'll close it out. So someone's asking about the types of semi-structured data that we can index inside of Snowflake, and the answer is JSON, Avro, Parquet, XML, ORC. And then structured data is all the usual suspects, including CSV and XLS. And other questions around our largest customers, how high do we scale? And the reality is it's pretty much unlimited in terms of scale because we rely on the underlying hardware of this cloud storage of the cloud providers. And last I checked, AWS or Azure, they're not running out of hardware anytime soon. So we've got customers that are literally 15 petabytes of stored data plus almost petabyte plus size tables, 5,000 plus active users, 4 million plus warehouse jobs a day, hundreds of millions of daily queries across all of our deployments. So scale is pretty much unlimited for our customers. And yeah, so with that, we've gone a bit over. So I'm going to wrap up the office hours. I definitely want to give a big thanks to David and QuoteWizard for the great content, and also to all of you in the audience for the great questions for David and myself. So this office hours has been recorded. It's going to be sent to all of you via email. Stay tuned for that. Hopefully we'll see you at the next office hours in 2 weeks. And in the meantime, I'd encourage all of you to visit snowflake.com to learn more about us. Lots of customer videos and case studies there. And also on the homepage, top right, you can sign up for a 30-day free trial of Snowflake. You get $400 of free credits. And you also get a self-paced tutorial that teaches you how to load demo data into Snowflake, both structured and unstructured. Join it, do a bunch of queries to it, play around with warehouse sizes, et cetera, and you'll have that aha moment around Snowflake with your own trial environment very fast. So with that, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Joe.